The Oklahoma Territory, 1878. A land where fortunes were built on blood and grit, where the difference between justice and tyranny often came down to who had the faster draw. Oakridge wasn't just another dusty frontier town, it was a chessboard, where every move could cost you everything. And at the center of our story today stand three souls whose destinies became tangled like barbed wire: Sheriff Clayton Redfield, Emma Sullivan, and a Comanche warrior known as Takoda. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first time Emma Sullivan laid eyes on Sheriff Clayton Redfield, she felt a chill despite the sweltering heat of an Oklahoma summer. It wasn't his appearance that unsettled her. Tall and broad-shouldered with a thick mustache and eyes the color of gunmetal, it was something in those eyes, something cold, something hungry. "Miss Sullivan," he tipped his hat with practiced charm that first Sunday after church. "Your father's ranch is mighty impressive, a credit to the territory." She'd nodded politely, the way her father had taught her. In Oakridge, the sheriff wasn't just another man with a badge. He was the living embodiment of the law itself. What Clayton Redfield decided was just became just. What he deemed criminal became crime. Emma had been raised on Eagle Crest Ranch, educated by private tutors brought in from back east. Walter Sullivan had made sure his only daughter had every advantage a frontier girl could have, ever since consumption had taken her mother 10 years prior. At 22, Emma was the pearl of Oakridge, beautiful, well-spoken, and heir to the most prosperous cattle operation in 3 counties. Sheriff Redfield began appearing at Eagle Crest with increasing frequency, always with some official reason. Reports of rustlers in the area, questions about water rights, concerns about disputed boundaries, always lingering just a little too long, his gaze following Emma as she moved about the house. "Your father's getting on in years, Miss Sullivan," he remarked during one such visit. "Must be a burden, managing all this without a husband's guidance." Emma had simply smiled. "My father taught me everything about ranching since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, Sheriff. I managed just fine." That was the day she first saw the flash of something dangerous behind his pleasant facade. A tightening around the eyes, a momentary clench of the jaw. Sheriff Redfield wasn't accustomed to women who spoke their minds. The seasons turned, summer heat giving way to autumn chill. And then came the night that changed everything. Emma was awakened by pounding on the door, urgent voices. She descended the stairs to find Deputy Mason Pierce standing in their front room, hat in hand, unable to meet her eyes. "It's your father, Miss Sullivan. There's been an accident at Cimarron Crossing." The world tilted beneath her feet. By sunrise, Walter Sullivan was pronounced dead, thrown from his horse while crossing the river, they said. Drowned before anyone could reach him, they said. But Emma knew better. Her father had been crossing that river since before she was born. He knew every rock, every current, every treacherous spot. And he never, ever rode that way after dark. She stood dry-eyed at the funeral, aware of the whispers, the pitying glances, aware, too, of Sheriff Redfield standing just a little too close, his hand at her elbow just a little too proprietary. "You shouldn't be alone at a time like this," he murmured, as the first shovelful of dirt hit her father's coffin. 3 days later, she discovered the truth. Eagle Crest Ranch was drowning in debt, or so the bank ledgers suddenly showed. Loans her father had supposedly taken out, mortgages against the property, promissory notes with interest rates that would make a snake oil salesman blush. "It doesn't make sense," she argued with the bank manager, Hiram Potter. "My father would never—" "I'm sorry, Miss Sullivan." Potter wouldn't meet her eyes either. "The paperwork is all here. Unless the debts are settled by the end of the month, I'm afraid the ranch will have to be auctioned." She was leaving the bank, mind reeling, when Sheriff Redfield appeared at her side, as if conjured by her misfortune. "Heard about your troubles, Miss Sullivan. terrible business. If there's anything I can do." His offer of marriage came the next day, not on bended knee with flowers and promises of devotion, but across her father's desk in the ranch study, laid out like a business proposition. "It's the only sensible solution," he explained, turning his hat in his hands with calculated humility. "I have the means to settle your father's debts. You keep the ranch, though naturally as your husband I'd have certain say in how things are run. The alternative, well, I hate to think of Walter's daughter turned out with nothing but the clothes on her back." Emma felt sick, trapped like a coyote in a steel jaw trap. "I need time to consider." "Of course," he nodded, all reasonable understanding. "Take until tomorrow." That night, she went through her father's papers again, searching for anything that might save her. It was then she found the small wooden box hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his bedroom, a place he'd shown her years ago, just in case. Inside was a leather pouch of gold coins, enough to buy passage east and start over, plus a folded piece of paper with a single line written in her father's bold hand. "If trouble comes, seek Takoda at Whispering Rocks." The name stirred something in her memory. Tales her father had told of encounters with the Comanche years ago, before the reservations. Of a young warrior whose life Walter had spared during a skirmish and who had later returned the favor. When Walter's cattle drive was ambushed. By morning, Emma had made her decision, not the one Redfield expected. She rode out at dawn, leaving a note that she needed a few days to put her father's affairs in order before giving the sheriff her answer. Instead, she headed west toward Whispering Rocks, a distinctive formation on the edge of what had once been Comanche hunting grounds. For 2 days, she saw nothing but hawks circling overhead and coyotes watching from distant ridges. On the third day, as she made camp in the shadow of the rocks, she felt rather than heard someone approaching. He emerged from the gathering dusk like a shadow taking form. Tall and lean, dressed in a mixture of native garments and settler clothing, a Winchester rifle held casually in one hand. His face was weathered by sun and wind, his black hair cut shorter than the traditional style, his dark eyes assessing her with neither hostility nor welcome. "You are Sullivan's daughter," he said. Not a question. Emma stood, fighting to keep her voice steady. "My father told me to find you if there was trouble. There's trouble." The man, Takoda, nodded once and gestured to her fire. "Then we talk." As night descended fully, Emma told him everything. Her father's suspicious death, the mysterious debts, Redfield's ultimatum. Takoda listened without interruption, his expression giving nothing away. When she finished, he stared into the fire for a long moment. "Your father saved my life when many would have taken it. I promised him a debt that would be paid if ever needed." He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "But what you ask may mean blood." "I don't ask for blood," Emma replied. "I ask for justice and time to find proof of what I know in my heart, that Sheriff Redfield had something to do with my father's death and these sudden debts." Takoda studied her face in the firelight. "The sheriff is protected by his badge and his men. Moving against him will not be simple. I understand the risk, but I won't marry that man." "Then we begin tomorrow." He rose in one fluid motion. "Sleep now. I will watch." In the days that followed, Emma learned that Takoda was not merely a skilled warrior, but a man who had learned to move between two worlds. He had worked as a scout for the army at times, knew the ways of both his people and the settlers, and most importantly, knew how to become invisible when needed. Together, they formulated a plan. Emma would return to Oakridge and stall Redfield with a show of grief-stricken indecision, while Takoda would investigate the circumstances of Walter's death and the suspicious financial records. What neither expected was that Redfield's patience had already worn thin. Emma returned to find Eagle Crest occupied. Redfield and his deputy had moved in, claiming concern for her safety after her reckless disappearance. Ndakum, the town doctor, a timid man named Simmons, had been persuaded to sign papers suggesting Emma's mental state was fragile following her father's death. "For your own protection," Redfield explained with cold courtesy. "A woman alone is vulnerable to all sorts of poor decisions." The trap had sprung sooner than anticipated. Every move she made was watched, every conversation overheard. When she tried to speak with Hiram Potter again about the loans, she found the bank closed. Potter, supposedly called away on family business. Mayor George Holloway proved equally unhelpful. "Now, Emma, we all want what's best for you," he soothed, not meeting her eyes. "Clayton Redfield is a respectable man. Perhaps not the husband of your dreams, but marriage is about practical considerations, especially out here." Behind his platitudes, Emma sensed fear. Whatever hold Redfield had on the town went beyond his badge. The wedding was scheduled for the following Sunday. "No sense in prolonged engagements," Redfield announced to the town. A hastily printed notice in the Oakridge Sentinel made it official. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the day approached, Emma felt the walls closing in. Her one hope lay with Takoda, but she had no way of knowing what he had discovered or if he could act in time. The wedding morning dawned clear and cool. Women from town arrived to help her dress, to pin up her hair, to exclaim over the dress Redfield had ordered from Kansas City. Through it all, Emma moved like a sleepwalker, searching for any opening, any chance. The church bell began to toll as they helped her into the wagon that would carry her to her fate. The entire town seemed to have turned out, lining the short route from Eagle Crest to the white clapboard church in Oakridge. Redfield waited at the church steps, dressed in a new black suit, his badge polished to a high shine. The smile he gave her never reached his eyes. "You look lovely, Emma," he said, offering his arm. "A vision of what every man hopes for in a bride." She had no choice but to take it, to let him lead her inside where Pastor Mills waited. The pews were filled with townspeople, some genuinely celebratory, others watching with the wary attention of those witnessing a public hanging. The ceremony began, Pastor Mills's voice echoing in the hushed church. Emma felt herself floating above the scene, as if watching someone else's nightmare unfold. If any person can show just cause why they may not be joined together, let them. Speak now or forever hold their peace. The traditional pause filled with expectant silence, and then, from the back of the church, a voice. "I have cause." Every head turned. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright morning light, was Takoda, but he wasn't alone. Beside him stood Hiram Potter, the bank manager, pale and trembling, and in Takoda's hand were papers, the same loan documents that had sealed Emma's fate, now clutched by the man who had signed them. Redfield's face hardened, his hand instinctively moving toward the gun he wore, even to his own wedding. "This is a private ceremony. Get out." Takoda stepped forward, unintimidated. "Tell them, Potter." The banker looked like he might faint, but when he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the church. "The loans are forgeries. I signed them under duress. Sheriff Redfield threatened my family if I didn't cooperate." A shocked murmur ran through the congregation. "That's a damned lie!" Redfield snarled, his mask of civility cracking. "This man is clearly being coerced by this savage." "Tell them the rest," Takoda urged Potter, his calm a stark contrast to Redfield's growing agitation. Walter Sullivan discovered that Redfield has been running a scheme, forcing ranchers into debt, then acquiring their land cheap. When Sullivan threatened to expose him to the territorial governor, Potter swallowed hard. Redfield arranged for his accident. The church erupted in shocked voices. Emma felt a surge of vindication mixed with grief. Her father had been murdered, just as she'd suspected. Redfield's composure shattered completely. In one swift motion, he drew his gun and grabbed Emma, pulling her against him with the barrel pressed to her temple. "Nobody moves!" he shouted over the panicked cries. "My wife and I are leaving now. Anyone tries to stop us, she dies first." The congregation froze. Even Takoda stood motionless, his dark eyes fixed on Redfield. "Drop your weapon," Redfield ordered him. "Now!" Slowly, deliberately, Takoda lowered his rifle to the floor, but his gaze never wavered, and Emma saw something in his expression. Not defeat, but a silent message. Trust. As Redfield began backing toward the door, dragging Emma with him, she remembered her father's lessons from years ago. About balance, about timing, about how even the strongest man has a vulnerable moment. She let her body go suddenly limp, becoming dead weight in Redfield's grip. The unexpected shift threw him off balance for just an instant, but it was enough. Takoda moved with the fluid grace of a hunting cougar, closing the distance in a heartbeat. There was a sharp crack as his fist connected with Redfield's gun arm, sending the weapon clattering across the church floor. What followed happened so quickly that later, witnesses would give conflicting accounts. Redfield released Emma to draw a hidden derringer from his vest. Takoda tackled him, both men crashing into a pew. A shot rang out, then silence. When the chaos cleared, Sheriff Clayton Redfield lay motionless, the small derringer still clutched. In his hand, a spreading crimson stain on his wedding shirt. His own bullet, meant for Takoda, had found him instead during their struggle. The aftermath unfolded like a fever breaking. Deputy Pierce, seeing which way the wind blew, quickly surrendered his badge. Mayor Holloway, desperate to save his own reputation, called for a full investigation that soon revealed the extent of Redfield's corruption. Other townspeople came forward with stories of intimidation and fraud. By sunset, the truth about Walter Sullivan's death was known throughout Oakridge, and Eagle Crest Ranch was officially returned to Emma's ownership, free of all fabricated debts. She found Takoda at the edge of town as he prepared to leave, his debt to her father now paid in full. "Where will you go?" she asked. "There is a place where the Cimarron meets the Red Cliffs," he replied. "My father's people camped there in better times. It is good land, away from both settlers and reservations." Emma nodded, understanding the pull of a place that feels like home. "I owe you my life, my freedom. You owe me nothing. It was your courage that saved you in the end." He mounted his horse with effortless grace. "Your father would be proud." As dusk painted the Oklahoma sky in shades of fire, Emma watched him ride away, a silhouette growing smaller against the horizon. Some in town whispered it was scandalous that she'd enlisted a Comanche's help against a lawman. Others called it poetic justice. Emma Sullivan didn't care what they called it. She stood on land that was rightfully hers, free to build the life she chose. And sometimes, on clear nights when the moon illuminated the distant whispering rocks, she would raise a glass to her father's memory, to courage found in desperate moments, and to debts that once paid create bonds stronger than blood. The seasons turned, summer heat giving way to autumn chill. And then came the night that changed everything. Emma was awakened by pounding on the door, urgent voices. She descended the stairs to find Deputy Mason Pierce standing in their front room, hat in hand, unable to meet her eyes. "It's your father. Miss Sullivan, there's been an accident at Cimarron Crossing." The world tilted beneath her feet. By sunrise, Walter Sullivan was pronounced dead, thrown from his horse while crossing the river, they said. Drowned before anyone could reach him, they said. But Emma knew better. Her father had been crossing that river since before she was born. He knew every rock, every current, every treacherous spot. And he never, ever rode that way after dark. She stood dry-eyed at the funeral, aware of the whispers, the pitying glances, aware, too, of Sheriff Redfield standing just a little too close, his hand at her elbow just a little too proprietary. "You shouldn't be alone at a time like this," he murmured as the first shovelful of dirt hit her father's coffin. 3 days later, she discovered the truth. Eagle Crest Ranch was drowning in debt, or so the bank ledgers suddenly showed. Loans her father had supposedly taken out, mortgages against the property, promissory notes with interest rates that would make a snake oil salesman blush. "It doesn't make sense," she argued with the bank manager, Hiram Potter. "My father would never—" "I'm sorry, Miss Sullivan." Potter wouldn't meet her eyes either. "The paperwork is all here. Unless the debts are settled by the end of the month, I'm afraid the ranch will have to be auctioned." She was leaving the bank, mind reeling, when Sheriff Redfield appeared at her side as if conjured by her misfortune. "Heard about your troubles. Miss Sullivan, terrible business. If there's anything I can do—" His offer of marriage came the next day, not on bended knee with flowers and promises of devotion, but across her father's desk in the ranch study, laid out like a business proposition. "It's the only sensible solution," he explained, turning his hat in his hands with calculated humility. "I have the means to settle your father's debts. You keep the ranch, though naturally, as your husband, I'd have certain say in how things are run. The alternative, well, I hate to think of Walter's daughter turned out with nothing but the clothes on her back." Emma felt sick, trapped like a coyote in a steel jaw trap. "I need time to consider." "Of course," he nodded, all reasonable understanding. "Take until tomorrow." That night, she went through her father's papers again, searching for anything that might save her. It was then she found the small wooden box hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his bedroom, a place he'd shown her years ago, just in case. Inside was a leather pouch of gold coins, enough to buy passage east and start over, plus a folded piece of paper with a single line written in her father's bold hand. "If trouble comes, seek Takoda at Whispering Rocks." The name stirred something. In her memory, tales her father had told of encounters with the Comanche years ago, before the reservations. Of a young warrior whose life Walter had spared during a skirmish and who had later returned the favor when Walter's cattle drive was ambushed. By morning, Emma had made her decision. Not the one Redfield expected. She rode out at dawn, leaving a note that she needed a few days to put her father's affairs in order before giving the sheriff her answer. Instead, she headed west toward Whispering Rocks, a distinctive formation on the edge of what had once been Comanche hunting grounds. For 2 days, she saw nothing but hawks circling overhead and coyotes watching from distant ridges. On the 3rd day, as she made camp in the shadow of the rocks, she felt rather than heard someone approaching. He emerged from the gathering dusk like a shadow taking form. Tall and lean, dressed in a mixture of native garments and settler clothing, a Winchester rifle held casually in one hand. His face was weathered by sun and wind, his black hair cut shorter than the traditional style, his dark eyes assessing her with neither hostility nor welcome. "You are Sullivan's daughter," he said, not a question. Emma stood, fighting to keep her voice steady. "My father told me to find you if there was trouble. There's trouble." The man, Takoda, nodded once and gestured to her fire. "Then we talk." As night descended fully, Emma told him everything. Her father's suspicious death, the mysterious debts, Redfield's ultimatum. Takoda listened without interruption, his expression giving nothing away. When she finished, he stared into the fire for a long moment. "Your father saved my life when many would have taken it. I promised him a debt that would be paid if ever needed." He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "But what you ask may mean blood." "I don't ask for blood," Emma replied. "I ask for justice, and time to find proof of what I know in my heart, that Sheriff Redfield had something to do with my father's death and these sudden debts." Takoda studied her face in the firelight. The sheriff is protected by his badge and his men. Moving against him will not be simple. I understand the risk, but I won't marry that man. Then we begin tomorrow." He rose in one fluid motion. "Sleep now. I will watch." In the days that followed, Emma learned that Takoda was not merely a skilled warrior, but a man who had learned to move between two worlds. He had worked as a scout for the army at times, knew the ways of both his people and the settlers, and most importantly, knew how to become invisible when needed. Together, they formulated a plan. Emma would return to Oakridge and stall Redfield with a show of grief-stricken indecision, while Takoda would investigate the circumstances of Walter's death and the suspicious financial records. What neither expected was that Redfield's patience had already worn thin. Emma returned to find Eagle Crest occupied. Redfield and his deputy had moved in, claiming concern for her safety after her reckless disappearance. The town doctor, a timid man named Simmons, had been persuaded to sign papers suggesting Emma's mental state was fragile following her father's death. "For your own protection," Redfield explained with cold courtesy, "a woman alone is vulnerable to all sorts of poor decisions." The trap had sprung sooner than anticipated. Every move she made was watched, every conversation overheard. When she tried to speak with Hiram Potter again about the loans, she found the bank closed. Potter, supposedly called away on family business. Mayor George Holloway proved equally unhelpful. "Now, Emma, we all want what's best for you," he soothed, not meeting her eyes. "Clayton Redfield is a respectable man, perhaps not the husband of your dreams, but marriage is about practical considerations, especially out here." Behind his platitudes, Emma sensed fear. Whatever hold Redfield had on the town went beyond his badge. Redfield kept her under constant watch, like a prize mare he'd purchased at auction. Each morning he instructed Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper he'd hired, on Emma's permitted activities for the day. Each evening he returned to dine with her, describing his plans for their future with presumptuous certainty. "We'll expand the herd come spring," he announced over a meal she couldn't stomach. "Buy up that worthless patch the Williams widow's trying to sell. Good water rights there." Emma merely nodded, forcing herself to appear defeated while her mind raced with possible escape routes. Every window was watched, every door guarded. Deputy Pierce slept in the barn, and two of Redfield's loyal men took shifts patrolling the property perimeter. 1 week into her captivity, a traveling peddler arrived at Eagle Crest. Jacob Mercer, a slight man with spectacles and a cart full of sundries. Mrs. Winters supervised closely as Emma browsed his wares in the front parlor. "Perhaps the lady would like to see some ribbons. Just got these in from St. Louis," Mercer suggested, opening a box lined with colorful spools. As Emma leaned forward to inspect them, she noticed a small folded paper tucked beneath a blue ribbon. With practiced sleight of hand, a skill learned from childhood games with her father, she palmed it while selecting a different color for Mrs. Winters' approval. Later, locked in her bedroom, she unfolded the note. "Whispering Creek, midnight. 3 taps on your window." Hope surged through her veins. Takoda had not abandoned her. That night, she prepared carefully. She dressed in her riding clothes, tucked her father's pouch of gold coins into an inside pocket, and wrapped a dark shawl around her shoulders. Then she waited, watching the moon creep across the sky through her window. When the soft tapping finally came, her heart nearly stopped. Peering through the glass, she saw not Takoda, but Mercer, the peddler, crouched on the small roof outside. Her window. She eased the window open. "Quickly," he whispered. "The guard changes in 5 minutes." Emma hesitated. "How do I know I can trust you?" "Takoda saved my boy from mountain fever 2 winters back. I owe him." Mercer glanced nervously toward the yard. "Now or never, miss." Decision made, Emma slipped through the window. With Mercer's guidance, they crept across the sloped roof, down a trellis, and through the shadows of the ranch buildings. A horse waited in a copse of trees beyond the corral. Not her own mount, which would have been recognized, but a sturdy bay that stood quietly as she swung into the saddle. Whispering Creek, where the three cottonwoods stand together, Mercer instructed. Godspeed, Miss Sullivan. Emma rode hard through the night, expecting at any moment to hear pursuit behind her. By the time she reached the designated meeting spot, her horse was lathered and her nerves frayed to breaking. The creek gurgled softly in the darkness, the promised cottonwoods looming like sentinels against the star-strewn sky. You made it! Takoda materialized from the shadows, leading his own horse. Barely. Redfield will discover I'm gone by dawn. Emma dismounted, legs trembling with exhaustion and tension. Did you find anything? Any proof? Takoda nodded. I found the man who was with your father the night he died, a ranch hand named Jessup. Tim Jessup, he worked our north pasture. Emma frowned. Redfield said he'd left the territory. He tried to. Redfield's men caught him at the Kansas border. Takoda's expression darkened. They thought they killed him, but I found him half alive in a ravine where they dumped him. He told me everything before he died. Emma's throat tightened. My father was murdered. Yes, Redfield and his men ambushed you, father, at the crossing. Made it look like an accident. Takoda hesitated. There's more. Jessup overheard Redfield talking. With the banker, Potter, they've been forcing ranchers into debt, then taking their land cheap. Your father discovered their scheme. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. And Potter's been forging loan documents. That's why he wouldn't look me in the eye. Takoda nodded. We need Potter to confess. Without him, it's just our word against the sheriffs. And no one will take the word of a woman and a Comanche over a sheriff. Emma concluded bitterly. There is one more ally we might call upon. The territorial judge, Hammond, arrives in Oakridge tomorrow for the monthly court session. He has no love for Redfield. The sheriff has overstepped his authority too many times. A plan began to form in Emma's mind. If we could get Potter to Judge Hammond, away from Redfield's influence. First, we must keep you hidden, Takoda countered. By now, Redfield knows you've fled. He'll have men searching everywhere. He led her deeper into the wilderness, to a secluded canyon where a small cabin nestled against the rock face. Trapper's place, abandoned for years. We'll rest here until nightfall. The cabin was little more than a shell. A dirt floor, a crude stone fireplace, walls of rough-hewn logs with gaps that let in the pre-dawn light. But after her ordeal, it felt like sanctuary to Emma. She slept fitfully on a bed of pine boughs while Takoda kept watch. When she woke, the sun was already westering, casting long shadows across the canyon floor. Takoda had prepared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, which they shared in companionable silence. Why did you agree to help me? Emma finally asked. Beyond the debt you owed my father. Takoda considered her question, his gaze distant. Your father was an unusual man. When his cattle drive was attacked, many settlers would have sought vengeance against all Comanche. Instead, he distinguished between those responsible and those innocent. Such wisdom is rare. He met her eyes. I see the same wisdom in you. Emma felt the weight of the compliment. My father always said that justice should be blind to a person's origins. That character matters more than the color of one's skin or the language of one's prayers. A good teaching. Takoda rose. We should prepare, night comes soon. Their plan was risky, but direct. Hiram Potter lived in a small house at the edge of Oakridge. While the town searched for Emma, Takoda would approach Potter after dark and convince him, one way or another, to accompany them to Judge Hammond's temporary chambers at the Oakridge Hotel. Emma insisted on being present. Potter knows me. He might be more willing to confess if he sees who his actions have harmed. Takoda didn't argue, but his expression made his concerns clear. They approached Oakridge from the south, avoiding the main roads. The town was unusually active for the late hour. Lanterns bobbed in the darkness as search parties set out in all directions. From their vantage point on a low ridge, Emma could see riders gathered in front of the sheriff's office, Redfield's distinctive figure giving orders from the boardwalk. "He's desperate," she murmured. "That gives us an advantage." They circled wide, approaching Potter's house from the rear. A single lamp burned in the back room. The banker was still awake despite the late hour. Takoda motioned for Emma to wait in the shadows while he approached. She watched as he soundlessly crossed the yard and tapped lightly on the window. After a moment, Potter's startled face appeared. There was a brief conversation, too quiet for Emma to hear. Then Potter disappeared from view. Seconds later, the back door opened. Emma expected resistance, fear, perhaps even outright hostility. What she didn't expect was Potter's haggard appearance. The man looked like he'd aged years in the days since she'd last seen him. His hands trembled as he beckoned them inside. "I've been waiting for someone to come," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Ever since I heard you'd escaped. Redfield he's gone mad with rage." Emma stepped into the lamplight. "Mr. Potter, you know what he did to my father." The banker flinched. "Miss Sullivan, you must understand. He threatened my family. My daughter," his voice broke. "He said he'd ensure she never made it to her wedding day." "I understand coercion, Mr. Potter," Emma replied, softening her tone. "But now you have a chance to make things right. Judge Hammond is in town. If you tell him the truth about the forged loans, about my father's murder—" "Murder?" Potter went pale. "I knew about the loans, yes, but I never—" He swallowed hard. "Dear God." Takoda spoke, his quiet voice somehow more compelling than shouted demands could ever be. "A dying man named Jessup told us everything. The ambush at Cimarron Crossing, Redfield's land scheme, your role in creating false debts." Potter sank into a chair, head in his hands. "I never wanted anyone to die. It started small, just pressure on struggling ranchers to sell to Redfield's silent partners. Then it grew, the forged documents, the threats." He looked up, eyes hollow. "Walter Sullivan was going to expose everything to the territorial governor. Redfield said he would handle it. I never imagined he meant murder." "Judge Hammond can protect you and your family," Emma urged, "but we must go now before Redfield realizes where we are." Potter nodded slowly. "There's a strongbox in my office at the bank. Documents Redfield doesn't know I kept. Insurance, I suppose, proof of everything." He straightened, making his decision. "I'll get them, then go with you to Hammond." Getting to the bank presented a new challenge. The main street of Oakridge was busy with Redfield's search parties, and a deputy had been posted directly in front of the bank building. Potter led them through back alleys, pausing frequently to check for patrols. "There's a rear entrance," he whispered as they crouched behind the livery stable. "Only the staff use it." The narrow streets felt like a maze in the darkness, each shadow potentially hiding one of Redfield's men. When they finally reached the bank's back door, Potter's hands shook so badly that Emma had to take the key and unlock it herself. Inside, the bank was eerily silent, moonlight filtering through the front windows to cast long shadows across the polished floor. Potter guided them to his office, a small room dominated by a massive oak desk and walls of filing cabinets. "The strongbox is hidden behind the painting," he explained, moving to a mediocre landscape on the wall. Behind it was a small wall safe. Potter spun the dial with practiced movements, and the door swung open to reveal a flat metal box. "Everything is here," he said, pulling it out. Correspondence with Redfield about which properties to target. Lists of falsified loans, even receipts for payments to men who intimidated sellers. Emma felt a surge of vindication. This is exactly what we need. A floorboard creaked in the outer room. Takoda moved instantly, extinguishing the lamp Potter had lit and drawing his knife in one fluid motion. He gestured for them to remain still as footsteps approached the office door. "Potter, you in there?" Deputy Pierce's voice. "Saw a light. Bank's supposed to be locked up." Emma's heart pounded so loudly she was certain the deputy would hear it. Potter looked paralyzed with fear, the strongbox clutched against his chest. The doorknob turned slowly. In the darkness, Takoda moved like smoke, positioning himself behind the door as it swung open. Deputy Pierce took 2 steps into the room, lantern held high, then froze as he spotted Potter and Emma. "What the—" He never finished the sentence. Takoda's arm snaked around the deputy's neck, applying pressure to specific points. Within seconds, Pierce slumped unconscious to the floor. "He'll wake soon," Takoda said, already moving to bind and gag the deputy. "We must hurry." Potter seemed to find his courage in the face of the narrow escape. "The hotel is 3 blocks north. If we cut through the alley behind Wilson's store, we can avoid the main street." They slipped out the way they had come, leaving Deputy Pierce secured in the office. The night had grown darker as clouds obscured the moon, which worked to their advantage as they navigated the town's backways. Occasionally, they would freeze as voices or footsteps passed nearby. Redfield had every available man searching for Emma. The Oakridge Hotel was the town's grandest building, a 3-story structure with actual glass windows and a wraparound porch. Judge Hammond, as the most distinguished visitor, would be in the best room on the top floor. "How do we get in without being seen?" Emma whispered as they observed the hotel from the shadow of a neighboring building. A man she recognized as one of Redfield's deputies stood on the porch, smoking a cigarette and watching the street. "Service entrance," Potter suggested, "through the kitchen." The hotel's kitchen was still active, despite the late hour, a cook preparing for the next day's breakfast while a young boy scrubbed pots. Both looked up in surprise as the unlikely trio entered. Potter stepped forward, attempting authority despite his disheveled appearance. "We need to see Judge Hammond immediately. It's official bank business, urgent." The cook frowned, clearly skeptical, but the mention of the judge's name gave him pause. "His honor's in room 12, but he won't thank you for disturbing him at this hour." "He'll want to hear what we have to say," Emma assured him, trying to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. The cook shrugged. "Your funeral. Take the back stairs, less likely to be seen." They climbed the narrow staircase, designed for servants to move invisibly through the hotel. The 3rd floor was quiet, most guests long since retired. Room 12 was at the end of the hall, its door distinguished by better quality wood than its neighbors. Emma raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. "What if he refuses to help us?" "He won't," Takoda said with quiet certainty. "Justice is like water. It finds its path, even through stone." Before she could respond, the door to room 12 opened, revealing a white-haired man in a dressing gown, a pistol held casually at his side. "I heard whispering," Judge Hammond said, his voice surprisingly gentle given the weapon in his hand. "I'm an old man who sleeps lightly. Now, who are you, and why are you outside my door at this ungodly hour?" Emma stepped forward. "Your Honor, I'm Emma Sullivan. This is Hiram Potter, the Oakridge bank manager, and this is Takoda. We have evidence of serious crimes committed by Sheriff Clayton Redfield, including the murder of my father, Walter Sullivan." The judge's bushy eyebrows rose, but he didn't immediately dismiss them. After a long moment, he stepped back, opening the door wider. "You'd better come in then." The judge's room was spacious by frontier standards. A large bed, a writing desk, two comfortable chairs, and a small fireplace where embers still glowed. Hammond gestured for them to sit while he remained standing, the pistol now resting on the desk within easy reach. "I've had my suspicions about Redfield for some time," he admitted, scrutinizing each of them in turn. "But suspicions aren't evidence. You said you have proof?" Potter placed the strongbox on the desk and opened it, hands steadier now. "Everything is documented here, Your Honor. The land scheme, the forged loans, the threats. I helped him, God forgive me, but I kept records." As Judge Hammond examined the documents, his expression grew increasingly grave. He paid particular attention to a letter from Redfield outlining which properties to target next. Eagle Crest Ranch prominent among them. "And the murder charge?" he asked, looking up at Emma. "This is serious." Takoda spoke. "I found a witness, Tim Jessup, who worked for Walter Sullivan. He was with Sullivan the night he died. Saw Redfield and his men ambush him at the river crossing. They tried to silence Jessup too, but he survived long enough to tell me what happened." "Jessup is dead now," Emma added quietly. "But his testimony matches what we already suspected. My father discovered Redfield's scheme and planned to report it." Hammond sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "I believe you. This evidence is damning, especially with Potter's testimony." He fixed the banker with a stern gaze. "You understand you'll face charges yourself?" Potter nodded miserably. "I do, but my conscience can't bear any more." "Very well." The judge straightened, decision made. "I'll issue warrants for Redfield's arrest immediately. We'll need the territorial marshal. Redfield's deputies won't move against him." "The nearest marshal is in Fort Smith," Emma said. Heart sinking. "That's 3 days' ride." "2 if you push hard," Hammond corrected. "I can dispatch a rider tonight." "And in the meantime," Emma pressed, "Redfield is hunting for me now. Once he discovers Potter's gone too and the evidence with him, he'll know what's happening." The judge considered this. "You're right. He's dangerous, and he'll be more so when cornered." He turned to Takoda. "Can you get Miss Sullivan to safety until the marshal arrives?" Takoda nodded. "Yes. And I'll keep Potter here under guard," Hammond continued. "I have 2 bailiffs who traveled with me. Good men, well armed. Redfield won't dare move against an appointed federal judge directly." It was a solid plan, but Emma felt a surge of frustration. "I don't want to hide while Redfield remains free. He killed my father. He tried to force me into marriage. He threatened innocent people." "Justice takes time, Miss Sullivan," Hammond said gently. "Your father would want you safe." The logic was irrefutable, but it did little to ease the knot of anger in her chest. Still, she nodded her agreement. They slipped out of the hotel the same way they had entered. Hammond's promise to send for the marshal immediately offering some comfort. The streets of Oakridge were quieter now, most of the search parties having moved to the outskirts of town. "We should get fresh horses," Takoda suggested as they made their way toward the livery stable. "The ones we left at the canyon are too tired for a hard ride." The stable was dark and quiet, most of its occupants out with Redfield's search parties. They moved silently among the stalls, selecting 2 strong mounts. Emma was just tightening the cinch on a dappled mare when the stable doors crashed open. Sheriff Clayton Redfield stood framed in the doorway, lantern high, revolver drawn. Behind him loomed several deputies. "Well, well," he drawled, cold rage evident in every syllable. "My runaway bride. And look, she's found herself a savage. Protect her." Emma's blood froze. Beside her, Takoda tensed, ready to spring. "How did you find us?" she demanded, playing for time, hoping Takoda could formulate a plan. Redfield smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. Deputy Pierce, maybe trussed up like a Christmas turkey, but he still managed to make enough noise for the night watchman to investigate. Simple matter to figure out where you'd go next. His gaze shifted to Takoda, hardening with contempt. Step away from Miss Sullivan. Now. Emma is not your property, Takoda replied, his voice calm, despite the weapons aimed at him. Neither is Sullivan land. Big words from a reservation jumper, Redfield sneered. He gestured to his men. Take him! And be careful with Miss Sullivan. She's clearly not in her right mind, poor thing, running off with this savage. The deputies advanced cautiously, well aware of Takoda's reputation. Emma glanced around desperately for a weapon, anything that might help them. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, Emma would have trouble recalling the exact sequence. Takoda moved with lightning speed, hurling something, a curry comb, at the lantern in Redfield's hand. The light shattered, plunging the stable into darkness, broken only by moonlight filtering through high windows. Shouts erupted, followed by the thunder of a pistol shot. Emma felt Takoda's hand close around her arm, pulling her down and then sideways between the stalls. Horses whinnied in panic, adding to the chaos. The back door, Takoda whispered in her ear. Stay low. They crawled through straw and dirt, the sounds of confusion behind them as Redfield bellowed orders and his men stumbled in the darkness. Reaching the small door used for mucking out stalls, Takoda eased it open just enough for them to slip through. Outside, the cool night air was a blessing after the stifling stable. They kept to the shadows, moving rapidly away from the shouting, and towards the cover of a nearby stand of trees. We need to split up, Takoda said, once they had put some distance between themselves and their pursuers. They'll expect us to stay together. Emma shook her head vehemently. No, we stay together. Listen. Takoda gripped her shoulders, his expression intense in the moonlight. Redfield wants you. Me, he'll simply kill. If we separate, he'll divide his forces to pursue us both. It gives us a better chance. Logic warred with emotion in Emma's mind. She knew he was right, but the thought of facing whatever came next alone terrified her. Where would I go? She asked finally. Circle northeast toward Broken Oak Ridge. There's a cave behind the waterfall there. I've used it before. I'll find you. He pressed something into her hand, a small knife in a leather sheath. Only if you have no choice. Emma nodded, tucking the knife into her boot. Then, impulsively, she leaned forward and pressed a quick kiss to Takoda's cheek. Stay alive. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. The same to you, Emma Sullivan. With that, they parted, Emma heading northeast, while Takoda moved purposefully in the opposite direction, making far more noise than was typical for him, a deliberate attempt to draw attention. Emma moved as swiftly as silence would allow, keeping to the deepest shadows, freezing whenever she heard voices or saw the distant glow of lanterns. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, the stars wheeling overhead as she pushed forward through brush and across small streams, always angling toward Broken Oak Ridge in the distance. She was crossing a small clearing when she heard the thunder of approaching hooves. Too exhausted to run, she dropped flat in the tall grass, praying the darkness would hide her. The rider reined in at the edge of the clearing, scanning slowly from the saddle. It wasn't Redfield or one of his deputies. The silhouette was wrong, bulkier, less familiar. Miss Sullivan? A man's voice called softly. Judge Hammond sent me. I'm Bailiff Collins. Emma remained motionless, suspicious. It could be a trap. The judge is worried, the voice continued. Redfield came to the hotel, demanding to know if the judge had seen you. Things got heated. The judge thought you might need help. Still, Emma hesitated. How could she be sure? He said to tell you that justice is like water. It finds its path, even through stone. The bailiff paused. Those were your companions. Words, he said. It was enough. Emma stood slowly, keeping a wary distance. How did you find me? The bailiff, a heavy-set man with a kind face, dismounted. Followed the direction your friend was leading Redfield away from. Figured you'd gone the opposite way. Judge Hammond said you were headed for Broken Oak Ridge. Is Takoda safe? Emma asked, fear tightening her throat. Collins shook his head grimly. Don't know, miss. There was shooting. But your friend, he's crafty. And Redfield lost at least 2 men trying to follow him through Devil's Canyon. A surge of hope warmed Emma's heart. If anyone could outmaneuver Redfield in the wilderness, it was Takoda. The judge sent me to bring you back to town, Collins continued. He's declared the hotel neutral territory. Redfield can't touch. You there, and the territorial marshal should arrive by tomorrow evening. Tomorrow? Emma's spirits lifted further. I thought it would be days. Lucky chance. Marshal Taylor was already en route to Fort Gibson, just a half-day's hard ride. From here, Collins offered a canteen. Judge Hammond's a cautious man. He's been suspicious of Redfield for months. Already had his eye on the situation. Emma drank gratefully, the cool water reviving her parched throat. What about Takoda? He should be protected too. The judge agrees, Collins nodded. That's why I'm to take you back and then go looking. And for him, offer the same sanctuary. It was the best option available. Emma allowed Collins to help her onto his horse, riding double back toward Oakridge. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten with pre-dawn glow as they approached the EI town. Rather than risk the main street, Collins led them through the same back alleys they had used earlier, bringing the horse to a halt behind the hotel. Judge Hammond himself met them at the service entrance, looking haggard but determined. Miss Sullivan, thank God. When I heard Redfield had found you at the stable. Takoda got us away, Emma explained as she followed him inside. But we were separated. Your man is going to look for him. Collins is my best tracker, Hammond assured her. If your friend can be found, he'll find him. The judge led her to a room adjacent to his own, smaller but comfortable. You'll be safe here. I've stationed my other bailiff in the hallway. Redfield wouldn't dare move against a federal judge directly. It would mean the gallows for certain. And Mr. Potter, Emma asked, secure in another room writing out his full testimony. Hammond's expression turned grim. He's a broken man, but his conscience has finally found its voice. Exhaustion crashed over Emma like a wave. She swayed on her feet, suddenly unable to remember when she had last slept properly. Rest, Hammond urged, guiding her to the bed. The marshal will be here by sunset. This nightmare is nearly over. Despite her concern for Takoda, Emma couldn't fight the pull of sleep any longer. She managed to remove her boots before collapsing onto the bed, the judge quietly withdrawing to let her rest. Her dreams were a chaotic jumble. Her father's face, Redfield's cold eyes, Takoda moving like a shadow through moonlit trees. She woke with a start to the sound of raised voices in the hallway. Sunlight streamed through the window. She had slept for hours. Moving cautiously to the door, Emma pressed her ear against the wood. Judge Hammond's authoritative tone was unmistakable, as was the cold rage in Redfield's response. You're harboring a fugitive, Your Honor. That puts you on dangerous legal ground. Miss Sullivan is under my protection as a material witness, Hammond replied evenly. As is Mr. Potter. If you wish to speak with either of them, you may do so once Marshal Taylor arrives, with your attorney present, of course. This is my jurisdiction, Redfield snarled. You're overstepping. On the contrary, Sheriff. As a federal judge, I have full authority to investigate suspected criminal activity by local officials. The evidence already in my possession is substantial. There was a long, tense silence. Then Redfield's voice, dangerously soft. You've made a serious mistake, Judge. This isn't over. I believe it is, Sheriff. I suggest you return to your office and prepare to surrender your badge to Marshal Taylor when he arrives. Footsteps. receded down the hallway, followed by the gentle knock on Emma's door. "Miss Sullivan, it's Judge Hammond." Emma opened the door to find Judge Hammond looking grave. "Redfield's desperate," he said without preamble. "That makes him more dangerous than ever." "Did your bailiff find Takoda?" she asked, the question that had been foremost in her mind since waking. Hammond's expression tightened. "Not yet. Collins is still searching." A cold knot of worry settled in Emma's stomach. Redfield's men might have found him first. "Let's not assume the worst," Hammond advised. "Your friend struck me as remarkably capable." He gestured to a tray on the small table by the window. "I had food brought up. You should eat. Keep your strength up." Emma wasn't hungry, but she recognized the wisdom in his words. As she picked at the bread and cold meat, Hammond updated her on the situation. "The marshal should arrive within hours. I've sent word to several prominent citizens to be present as witnesses when Redfield is arrested, strength in numbers, and respectable testimony if needed." "Will that be enough?" Emma asked. "Redfield has deputies loyal to him, men who've participated in his crimes." "Which is precisely why I've also contacted Captain Reynolds at Fort Gibson. A small detachment of soldiers will accompany Marshal Taylor." Hammond smiled thinly. "I've dealt with corrupt sheriffs before, Miss Sullivan. The key is overwhelming force and irrefutable evidence." Emma was about to respond when a commotion erupted outside. Shouts, then the crack of a gunshot, followed. By more shouting, she and Hammond rushed to the window. In the street below, a crowd had gathered, tensions visibly high. At the center stood Sheriff Redfield, addressing the townspeople, his voice carrying clearly in the still afternoon air. "Citizens of Oakridge, I've served as your sheriff for 5 years, keeping the peace, upholding the law. Now we have outsiders trying to undermine that peace. A corrupt judge, a hysterical woman, and a savage murderer." The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement, others looking uncertain. This so-called judge has taken it upon himself to harbor fugitives and make wild accusations against a duly appointed officer of the law, Redfield continued, his performance masterful. "Meanwhile, a dangerous Comanche is loose in our territory, a man who has already assaulted one of my deputies and is suspected in the deaths of 2 others. Emma's hands clenched into fists. "He's turning the town against us, against Takoda." Hammond's face was grim, a desperate play. He's trying to create a situation where he can claim he acted with the town's support. He turned from the window. "We need to get you somewhere more secure. If he riles that crowd enough, they might storm the hotel." "I won't hide," Emma said firmly. "The truth is on our side. Let me speak to them." "Miss Sullivan, these people have lived under Redfield's influence for years. Many have benefited from his corruption. Others are simply afraid of him. And still others know he's wrong but have never had anyone stand up to him." Emma straightened her spine. "My father would have faced them. I won't do less." Hammond assessed her, respect dawning in his eyes. "Very well, but not alone." He led her to his room, where he retrieved a document from his desk. "My official findings based on the evidence presented. It lists the charges against Redfield, fraud, extortion, and the murder of Walter Sullivan. With my signature and seal, it carries the full weight of federal authority." Together, they descended to the hotel's front entrance, the elderly desk. Clark tried to dissuade them from going outside, but Hammond was resolute. "Federal business, Mr. Simmons. Please stand aside." The hotel's front doors opened onto the broad porch overlooking the main street. Redfield had positioned himself in front of the sheriff's office directly across the way, still addressing the growing crowd. He faltered momentarily when he spotted Emma and the judge. "Well, look who's decided to join us," he called quickly. Recovering, the so-called judge and the delusional Miss Sullivan. The crowd turned, faces showing a range of emotions: curiosity, suspicion, hostility, and here and there, hope. Emma recognized many: shopkeepers, farmers, ranchers, ordinary people who had known her and her father for years. Judge Hammond stepped forward, command in every line of his body. "Citizens of Oakridge, I am Federal Judge Ezekiel Hammond. I hold in my hand formal charges against Sheriff Clayton Redfield for multiple counts of fraud, extortion, and for the murder of Walter Sullivan." Redfield's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Baseless accusations. Where's your proof, Judge?" "The sworn testimony of Hiram Potter, manager of the Oakridge Bank, who has detailed the scheme by which you forged loan documents to force ranchers, including Walter Sullivan, into debt." Hammond's voice carried effortlessly. "The testimony of Timothy Jessup, who witnessed your ambush of Walter Sullivan at Cimarron Crossing before you attempted to silence him permanently. The physical evidence of altered records and correspondence detailing your land-grabbing operations." A ripple moved through the crowd. Hiram Potter's name carried weight in Oakridge. He was known, respected, and Jessup had been well liked among the ranch hands. "Potter's been coerced," Redfield countered, though Emma could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool day. "And Jessup, a drunkard who'd say anything for his next bottle. Mr. Potter is prepared to face consequences for his own part in your schemes," Hammond replied evenly. As for Timothy Jessup, he gave his dying declaration, a statement admissible in any court in this territory. Emma stepped forward, keeping her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "Many of you have known me and my father for years. You know Walter Sullivan was no fool with money. He built Eagle Crest from nothing. Does anyone really believe he would suddenly take out loans he couldn't repay? Or that he would ride Cimarron Crossing at night when he knew every danger of that route?" Faces in the crowd showed uncertainty, some nodding in agreement. "My father discovered Sheriff Redfield's scheme," she continued. "He was going to expose it. That's why he was killed." "Lies," Redfield snarled, his mask of reasonableness slipping. "This woman is hysterical with grief, making wild accusations." From the back of the crowd, a new voice spoke. "The lady speaks true." People turned, parting to reveal an elderly man, leaning on a cane, Abraham Wilson, owner of the general store and one of the town's original settlers. "Walter Sullivan came to me the day before he died," Wilson said, his voice wavering but determined. "Showed me bank papers he believed were forged. Said he was gathering evidence against the sheriff. I told him to be careful." The old man's voice broke. "Should have done more than just warn him." Redfield's face darkened with rage. "You're a doddering old fool, Wilson. Your memory's gone along with your sense." "My memory's just fine," Wilson retorted. "Fine enough to remember when you pressured my nephew to sell his timber claim for half its worth last year. Fine enough to remember the bruises on Miller's face after he refused to pay your special tax." Other voices rose from the crowd now, people finding courage in numbers. "You threatened to arrest my son if I didn't sell you my south pasture. You said my store would burn if I didn't pay for extra protection." Each accusation emboldened others, years of resentment and fear finally finding voice. Redfield's hand moved to his gun. "This is insurrection. I am the law in Oakridge." "Not anymore," Judge Hammond declared, unfolding an official document. "By the authority vested in me by the United States government, I am removing you from office pending investigation of these charges. You will surrender your badge and firearms immediately." For a long moment, the scene balanced on a knife's edge. Redfield's deputies, who had been flanking him, exchanged uncertain glances. The crowd, no longer cowed, watched with hard eyes. Redfield seemed to make a calculation, measuring his dwindling support. Then his expression shifted, a smile spreading across his face that made Emma's blood run cold. "You've forgotten something important, Judge. Your precious marshal hasn't arrived yet." His voice took on a silky quality. "And I still have an ace to play." He turned and nodded to one of his deputies, who disappeared into the sheriff's office. Moments later, he emerged, half dragging, half supporting a battered figure. Takoda. Emma's heart lurched. The Comanche warrior was barely conscious, his face bruised, blood darkening his shirt at the shoulder. Yet even in his weakened state, he carried himself with dignity, refusing to be completely supported by his captor. "Found this murderous savage skulking around the territory," Redfield announced. "Resisted arrest. Killed 2 of my men before we subdued him." "Liar!" Emma took an instinctive step forward before Hammond's restraining hand stopped her. Redfield's smile widened. "By territorial law, I have the authority to execute dangerous fugitives when they pose an imminent threat to the community. I think a Comanche who's killed white men certainly qualifies." He drew his pistol, aiming it at Takoda's head. "Stop!" Emma broke free from Hammond, rushing down the hotel steps. "If you harm him, any chance of mercy from the court vanishes. The marshal is already on his way with soldiers from Fort Gibson." Redfield's eyes flickered with momentary doubt, but his gun didn't waver. "Nice try, Miss Sullivan, but I'm done playing games." "She speaks true." A new voice, powerful and commanding, cut through the tension. At the far end of the street, a group of riders had appeared. A tall man in the distinctive clothing of a U.S. Marshal at their head, flanked by blue uniformed soldiers. "Marshal Taylor, United States Department of Justice," the man announced, urging his horse forward. "Sheriff Redfield, lower your weapon and surrender yourself." For a heartbeat, Emma thought it was over. Then Redfield's face contorted with fury. In one swift motion, he grabbed Takoda, using him as a shield with his gun pressed to the wounded man's temple. "Back off, Marshal," he shouted, "or the savage dies first, then the girl." The crowd scattered, clearing the street as guns were drawn on both sides. The soldiers took positions, rifles aimed, while Redfield's remaining loyal deputies formed a protective line. Emma stood frozen in the middle, caught between the hotel steps and Redfield's position, horribly exposed. "Miss Sullivan, get to cover," Marshal Taylor ordered, his voice tense but controlled. Before she could move, Redfield barked, "Stay right there, Emma. Anyone tries anything and I start shooting." It was a standoff, with Takoda and Emma as hostages, one direct, one by proximity. Emma locked eyes with Takoda, whose gaze, despite his injuries, remained alert and calculating. Almost imperceptibly, he tilted his head, a signal. Emma remembered their conversations in the canyon, the silent communication they had developed. He was telling her to be ready. "Redfield," Marshal Taylor called, "you're only making this worse for yourself. Release your hostage, surrender your weapon, and you'll receive a fair trial." "Fair trial?" Redfield laughed harshly. "We all know how that ends." "No, I think I'll take my chances." He began backing toward the sheriff's office, dragging Takoda with him. "Miss Sullivan, you're coming with us. Insurance for our safe passage out of town." Emma's mind raced. If she refused, he would likely shoot Takoda immediately. If she complied, he might kill them both once they were away from witnesses. Either way, Redfield was a cornered animal, unpredictable and deadly. She took a hesitant step forward, playing for time. "Let Takoda go. I'll come willingly." "Noble, but I'll keep both of you, thanks," Redfield sneered. "Now move." It happened in an instant. Takoda, who had appeared near unconsciousness, suddenly dropped his full weight, throwing Redfield off balance. As the sheriff staggered, Takoda twisted, his bound hands rising to knock the gun upward just as it discharged. Emma dove to the ground as shots erupted from multiple directions. When she looked up, chaos had engulfed the street. Soldiers exchanged fire with Redfield's deputies, townspeople scrambled for safety, and at the center of it all, Redfield and Takoda were locked in a desperate struggle. Despite his bound hands and injuries, Takoda fought with the focused intensity of a warrior who had accepted that death might come at any moment. Redfield, though surprised by the sudden resistance, had the advantages of being uninjured and unbound. Emma searched frantically for something, anything to help. Her gaze fell on a discarded rifle dropped by one of Redfield's deputies who had already fallen to the marshal's men. Crawling forward, staying low beneath the gunfire, she grabbed it. The weapon was heavy, unfamiliar in her hands. Her father had taught her to shoot for protection on the ranch, but this was different. Taking a human life, even one as deserving as Redfield's, was no small thing. She raised the rifle, trying to aim at Redfield without risking Takoda, but the two were grappling too closely, constantly shifting. Taking the shot was too dangerous. Then she saw another opportunity. Redfield had backed up against the water trough in front of the sheriff's office. The heavy wooden structure was old, its supports weakened by years of horses leaning against it. Emma adjusted her aim and fired. The bullet splintered the trough's main support. Water gushed as the structure collapsed, catching Redfield from behind and throwing him off balance. It was the opening Takoda needed. Despite his bound hands, he managed to grab Redfield's gun arm, forcing it upward as another shot discharged harmlessly into the air. Marshal Taylor and his men, seeing the opportunity, converged on the struggle. Within moments they had subdued Redfield, disarming him and forcing him to the ground. Clayton Redfield, you are under arrest for fraud, extortion, and the murder of Walter Sullivan, the marshal announced formally, though Redfield's spitting curses was past listening. Emma rushed to Takoda, who had slumped against the remains of the water trough, his burst of energy fading now that the immediate danger had passed. She caught him before he could fall, supporting his weight as best she could. "You're safe now," she told him, her voice thick with emotion. "It's over." Takoda's dark eyes met hers, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "We are both safe." The aftermath unfolded with surprising swiftness. Judge Hammond convened an emergency court session that very evening, with the town's most respected citizens serving as witnesses. Potter's testimony, combined with the evidence from his strongbox, was damning. Wilson and several others came forward with their own accounts of Redfield's abuses of power. By nightfall, Clayton Redfield had been formally charged with multiple counts of fraud, extortion, and the murder of Walter Sullivan. He would be transported to Fort Smith for trial, accompanied by a full military escort to prevent any attempt at escape or rescue by his few remaining loyal men. Emma sat beside Takoda's bed in the hotel room that had been converted to a temporary infirmary. The town doctor had cleaned and bandaged his wounds. A bullet grazed to the shoulder. Various cuts and bruises from his capture and the subsequent fight. "How did they catch you?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Takoda's expression darkened with memory. "I led them away from you, as planned. But there were more men than I expected coming from different directions. One got lucky, a shot that passed close enough to stun me with flying bark splinters." He touched the healing cut on his temple. "When I fell, they were on me before I could recover. I thought," Emma's voice faltered, "when I saw you there in front of the sheriff's office, you thought I would die." He stated it simply without drama. "So did I. But it would have been a good death if it meant your safety." Emma shook her head firmly. "No death in this would have been good." Takoda studied her face, his expression thoughtful. "Your people and mine see death differently. For the Comanche, dying to fulfill a debt of honor brings peace to the spirit. And living to see justice done," Emma challenged gently, "does that not also bring peace?" The ghost of a smile touched his lips again. "Perhaps you are right." Judge Hammond entered, bringing news that further lightened their spirits. The bank has officially voided all the fraudulent loans associated with Redfield's scheme. Eagle Crest is unquestionably yours, Miss Sullivan, free and clear. Emma felt a weight lift from her shoulders, the last of the fear that had haunted her since her father's death. Thank you, Your Honor, for everything. Don't thank me, Hammond demurred. Justice prevailed because good people finally stood together against corruption. It's a lesson this territory needs. When the judge had gone, Emma turned back to Takoda. What will you do now? Your debt to my father is paid many times over. The question seemed to take him by surprise. I had not thought beyond ensuring your safety. You could stay, Emma suggested, the words coming more easily than she had expected. Eagle Crest is large. There's a valley to the north that would make good grazing land for horses. My father always said you were the finest horseman he'd ever seen. Takoda was silent for a long moment, considering. The world is changing. My people are caught between two paths, the old ways dying, the new ways foreign and often cruel. Not all new ways are cruel, Emma said softly. Some are just different. My father believed that people of good heart could find common ground, regardless of where they began. Your father was an unusual man, Takoda acknowledged. Perhaps his daughter is equally unusual. Emma felt a blush warm her cheeks. Is that a yes? You'll stay? Takoda's expression remained serious, though his eyes held warmth she had rarely seen before. For a time, I will stay. Beyond that. He let the sentence hang unfinished, a question mark rather than a period. It was enough, Emma decided. The future would unfold as it would, shaped by choices yet to be made. For now, it was sufficient to know that Takoda would remain at Eagle Crest while he healed, that justice had been served for her father, and that for the first time since Walter Sullivan's death, she could look forward rather than backward. Spring came to Oklahoma Territory with a riot of wildflowers and new growth, as if the land itself was celebrating the end of winter. At Eagle Crest Ranch, the change of seasons brought more than just natural renewal. It marked nearly 6 months since Clayton Redfield's arrest and the beginning of a transformation that few in Oakridge could have predicted. Emma Sullivan stood on the ranch house porch, watching as Takoda worked with a spirited yearling colt in the corral. His methods were unlike anything the local ranchers had seen, gentle but firm, building trust rather than breaking spirit. The horses he trained were becoming known throughout the territory for their responsiveness and intelligence. The arrangement they had struck had evolved naturally. Takoda had indeed stayed to recover from his injuries, then remained to help. With winter preparations, when Emma found herself short-handed after several of her father's old ranch hands moved on. By the time the first snow fell, he had established himself in the small cabin near the north pasture and begun building what was now a thriving horse training operation. It hadn't been without challenges. Some in Oakridge still viewed a Comanche, living and working openly at one of the territory's premier ranches, as scandalous at best, dangerous at worst. But Emma had discovered that she had inherited more than just her father's land and business acumen. She had his stubborn determination to follow her own moral compass, regardless of others' opinions. Miss Sullivan? The voice belonged to Daniel Fletcher, Eagle Crest's new foreman, a capable young man who had proven himself respectful of both Emma's authority and Takoda's expertise. The buyers from Kansas City are here. Emma nodded, straightening her jacket. Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Please show them to the south pasture. I'll join you shortly. This would be Eagle Crest's largest cattle sale since her father's death, an important step in cementing the ranch's recovery from the Redfield affair. The Kansas City buyers were known to be fair but demanding, and securing their business would mean financial stability through the coming year. As she gathered the sale documents from her father's, now her desk, Emma reflected on how much had changed. The town of Oakridge itself had undergone a transformation. With Redfield's corrupt influence removed, honest businesses flourished. The new sheriff, elected in a special vote, was a former army sergeant named Thomas Grant, straightforward, incorruptible, and possessed of a dry sense of humor that had earned him the town's respect. More personally, Emma had grown into her role as Eagle Crest's owner. The initial skepticism about a young woman running a major ranch had faded as she demonstrated that Walter Sullivan had indeed taught her everything she needed to know. Her decisions had proven sound, her management style firm but fair, and the ranch's profitability spoke for itself. The meeting with the buyers went smoothly, ending with handshakes and a contract for twice the number of cattle they had purchased the previous year. As the men departed, promising to send their drivers for the herd within the week, Emma felt a surge of satisfaction. Her father would have been proud. She found Takoda still at the corral, now observing as one of the younger. Ranch hands attempted to replicate his training techniques with another colt. "The Kansas City deal is finalized," she told him, leaning against the fence. They were particularly impressed with the condition of the herd after the hard winter. Takoda nodded, his expression revealing a hint of pride. It had been his idea to rotate the grazing areas more frequently than was common practice, ensuring the cattle always had adequate forage despite the heavy snow. "The young ones are learning," he observed, gesturing to the ranch hand who was making progress with the nervous colt. "Jason has good hands, a patient spirit." "He respects you," Emma replied. "Most of them do now." Respect comes with time and proven worth. Takoda's gaze shifted to the distant horizon, where dark clouds were gathering. "Storm's coming. Big one." Emma followed his gaze, noting the distinctive greenish tint to the clouds. Tornado weather. They had seen 3 such storms since spring began, though none had directly hit the ranch. Still, preparations were automatic. Now, securing loose items, ensuring the storm cellar was accessible, checking that all hands knew where to seek shelter. "I'll warn the bunkhouse," Takoda said, already moving with his characteristic efficiency. Emma headed to the main house to alert Mrs. Kavanaugh, the housekeeper she'd hired after Mrs. Winters departed. The older woman had already noticed the approaching storm and was closing windows, her movements brisk and practiced. "Going to be a bad one, Miss Sullivan," she predicted grimly. "My joints never lie about such things." By mid-afternoon, the storm had arrived in full fury. Rain lashed the ranch in horizontal sheets driven by howling winds. Lightning split the sky in jagged bursts, followed almost instantly by deafening thunder. The tornado warning bell rang out from town, 3 long peals signaling immediate danger. Emma and Mrs. Kavanaugh had just reached the storm cellar when Jason, the young ranch hand, came running toward the house, drenched and frantic. "Miss Sullivan!" he shouted over the storm's roar. "The creek's overflowing. The new calves in the east pasture are trapped by rising water." Emma's heart sank. The spring calves represented a significant investment, but more importantly, she couldn't bear the thought of the animals drowning when something might be done to save them. "Where's Mr. Fletcher? Takoda?" she asked, already knowing she wouldn't like the answer. "Foreman's got men securing the main herd. Takoda took 2 riders to check the line shack where the Johnsons are staying." Jason looked miserable. "I'm the only one left near the house." Emma made her decision instantly. "Get to the cellar. Mrs. Kavanaugh, make sure he stays there." "Miss Sullivan, you can't mean to—" the housekeeper began aghast. "Those calves won't survive on their own." Emma was already moving toward the barn, shouting over her shoulder, "If Takoda returns, tell him where I've gone." The east pasture lay a mile from the main house, across now treacherous terrain. Emma saddled her most sure-footed horse, a sturdy, buckskin gelding named Copper, who seemed to sense the urgency of their mission despite his obvious discomfort at being out in the storm. The ride was harrowing. Twice, gusts of wind nearly unseated her, and the path was rapidly becoming a quagmire of mud and debris. When they finally reached the east pasture, the situation was worse than she had feared. The normally placid creek had become a raging torrent, and at least 20 calves were stranded on what had become a shrinking island as the waters rose. Their mothers, separated on the mainland, were frantically pacing and bawling their distress. Emma assessed the situation quickly. The water was too deep and fast for the calves to cross safely, but there was a narrower point about 50 yards upstream where a large oak had fallen partially across the swollen creek. If she could get to the island, she might be able to drive. The calves along it to safety? It was risky, made more so by the intensifying storm, but she could see no alternative. Dismounting, she secured Copper to a tree on high ground and began picking her way carefully toward the fallen oak. The crossing was perilous. The log was slippery with rain, and the creek surged just inches below her boots, threatening to sweep her away with each step. Halfway across, a piece of debris slammed into the tree, causing it to shift. Emma fell to her knees, clinging desperately to the rough bark as the makeshift bridge settled into a new position. After what seemed an eternity, she reached the island. The calves, already frightened by the storm, shied away from this new intrusion. Using techniques she'd learned from childhood, Emma began to herd them slowly toward the fallen oak. Her voice, pitched to carry over the storm's fury, without adding to their panic. The first few calves balked at the crossing until Emma managed to get the boldest one moving. As is often the case with herd animals, where one led, others followed. One by one, they picked their way across the log under Emma's guidance, reaching the safety of the mainland, where their anxious mothers greeted them. She was guiding the last calf across when disaster struck. A massive section of debris, a tangle of branches and what looked like parts of someone's shed, came churning downstream directly toward the log bridge. Emma had just enough time to shove the final calf to safety before the impact hit. The log shifted violently, then broke free of its remaining anchor on the island side. Emma was thrown into the churning water, the current immediately dragging her under. She fought to surface, gasping for air when she managed to break free, only to be pulled down again by the creek's relentless power. Her world narrowed to the desperate struggle for breath, for orientation in the murky torrent. She slammed into something hard, a rock or submerged tree, pain exploding through her side. The impact spun her around, but also pushed her toward the surface again. As she broke through, coughing and fighting for air, she glimpsed the shoreline tantalizingly close. With her remaining strength, Emma struck out toward it, fighting the current that seemed determined to claim her. Her fingers scraped mud, then roots. She clawed her way forward, pulling herself inch by agonizing inch onto the bank, until she lay half out of the water, too exhausted to move further but safe from the immediate threat of drowning. The rain continued to pound down, mingling with the creek water that streamed from her sodden clothing. The pain in her side was intense now that the immediate crisis had passed, suggesting at least bruised ribs, if not worse. Emma tried to stand, managed to get to her knees, then slumped back down as dizziness overwhelmed her. She wasn't sure how long she lay there, drifting between consciousness and a grey haze of pain and exhaustion. The storm continued to rage, though it seemed to be moving past now, the wind's direction shifting. Through the driving rain, she became aware of a figure approaching, tall, moving with purposeful grace, despite the treacherous footing. "Takoda," she whispered, relief washing through her. He reached her side, dropping to one knee to assess her condition, his expression a mixture of concern and something like controlled anger. "Can you stand?" he asked, voice tight. Emma nodded, though she wasn't entirely certain. With Takoda's support, she managed to get to her feet, wincing as the movement sent fresh pain through her injured side. "The calves?" she asked, leaning heavily against him. "Safe. I counted 22 on the mainland with their mothers." There was that note in his voice again, restraint over what seemed to be considerable emotion. "Copper is also safe. I found him straining at his tether when I followed your trail." They moved slowly, Takoda bearing most of her weight as they made their way back to where he had left his horse. Unlike Emma, he had ridden his preferred mount, a magnificent black stallion with Comanche lineage that seemed utterly unfazed by the storm. The journey back to the ranch house was a blur for Emma. The pain in her side had settled into a persistent throb, and she was becoming aware of other injuries. Scraped hands, bruised legs, a cut on her forehead that was bleeding. Into her eye, nestled in front of Takoda on his horse, his arms secure around her waist to keep her from falling, she drifted in and out of awareness. By the time they reached Eagle Crest, the storm had largely passed, though rain still fell steadily. The ranch. Hands had emerged from their various shelters and were already assessing damage and beginning repairs. A cheer went up when they spotted Takoda returning with Emma. Mrs. Kavanaugh took charge the moment they entered the house, directing Takoda to carry Emma to her bedroom while she gathered medical supplies. The housekeeper had been a midwife in her younger days and had a practical knowledge of treating injuries that had proved valuable more than once on the frontier ranch. "Bruised ribs, not broken, thank the Lord," she pronounced after examining Emma's side. "Cut on the forehead needs cleaning, but won't need stitching. The rest is scrapes and bruises that'll heal with time." She fixed Emma with a stern look. "You were lucky, Miss Sullivan, mighty lucky." When Mrs. Kavanaugh had finished her ministrations and departed to prepare a medicinal tea, Takoda remained by Emma's bedside. He had been silent throughout the examination and treatment, his face unreadable. "You're angry with me," Emma said finally, meeting his gaze directly despite her exhaustion. "You risked your life unnecessarily," he replied, his voice level but intense. "There were other solutions. Those calves would have drowned before help could arrive." She winced as she tried to sit up straighter. "I couldn't stand by and do nothing. And if you had drowned?" The question hung in the air between them. What happens to Eagle Crest then? To the people who depend on you? The implications of his words struck her forcefully. She had been thinking of the immediate crisis, not the larger consequences of her actions. If she had died, the ranch would have faced an uncertain future. The hands who worked for her, Mrs. Kavanaugh, even Takoda himself, all would have been affected. "I didn't think beyond saving the calves," she admitted quietly. A leader must think beyond the moment. Takoda's expression softened slightly. "Your courage is not in question. Your judgment, however..." Despite her discomfort, Emma felt a smile tug at her lips. "Are you saying I should have waited for the wise and experienced Takoda to devise a better plan?" A hint of answering humor flickered in his dark eyes. "I am saying that wisdom sometimes means acknowledging when help is needed." It was as close to a reprimand as he had ever given her, and Emma recognized the truth in his words. Her father had always taught her that true strength lay not in doing everything alone, but in knowing when to rely on others. "You're right," she conceded. "It was foolish to go alone." After a moment's reflection, she added, "Though I did save the calves." Takoda shook his head, but she could see the tension leaving his shoulders. "Rest now. Tomorrow there will be much work to repair. The storm's damage." As he turned to leave, Emma caught his hand, surprising them both with the gesture. "Thank you for coming for me." His fingers tightened briefly around hers. "Always." It was just one word, spoken simply, but it carried a wealth of meaning that lingered in the room long after he had gone. The days following the storm were filled with the necessary work of recovery. Fences needed mending, a section of the barn roof had been damaged, and debris littered the pastures. Everyone at Eagle Crest worked from dawn to dusk, with Emma joining, inasmuch as her injuries permitted, despite Mrs. Kavanagh's protests. A week after the storm, with the most urgent repairs completed, Emma decided it was time to ride into Oakridge. They needed supplies, and she wanted to check on others in the community who might have suffered damage. Takoda accompanied her, both of them mounted on horses from his training program that had proven their worth during the recovery efforts. Oakridge had weathered the storm relatively well. Some buildings showed damage, missing shingles, broken windows, toppled fences, but the sturdy construction that frontier life demanded had served the town well. The general store was busy with people replenishing supplies, and Emma noticed several unfamiliar faces among the customers. Wilson, the elderly shopkeeper, greeted her warmly. "Miss Sullivan, good to see you up and about. Heard you had quite an adventure during the storm." News traveled fast in small communities. Emma smiled ruefully. "Nothing I'd care to repeat, Mr. Wilson. How did the town fare?" "Could have been worse. Dr. Simmons has been busy with minor injuries, but no deaths reported, thank the Lord." The old man lowered his voice confidentially. "We've got newcomers arriving, did you notice? Family from Missouri moved into the old Peterson place, and there's talk of the railroad finally extending a spur line to Oakridge." The possibility of a railroad connection was significant news. It would mean faster, more reliable transportation for cattle and goods, potentially transforming Oakridge from a remote frontier town to a more connected community. "That would be quite a change," Emma observed. "Good for business, I'd imagine." "For some," Wilson agreed. "Change always favors some more than others. Speaking of change." He nodded toward the newspaper office across the street, where a newly painted sign declared Oakridge Gazette, Elijah Montgomery, editor and proprietor. "New publisher?" Emma asked, curious. The previous owner had been an elderly man who printed little more than announcements and advertisements. "Young? A fellow from Chicago, got modern ideas and a proper printing press being delivered next month." Wilson chuckled. "Been interviewing folks about the storm, asking questions about town governance, business prospects. Sheriff Grant says he asks more questions than a 5-year-old at a circus." Emma's interest was piqued. Oakridge had never had a real newspaper, just the occasional bulletin. A proper gazette could be a positive development, bringing news from beyond their isolated community and perhaps even attracting more settlers and investment. The opportunity to meet the new newspaper editor presented itself sooner than Emma expected. As she and Takoda were loading supplies into their wagon, a young man approached, notepad in hand. He was perhaps 30, with intelligent eyes behind, wire-rimmed spectacles, and a thoughtful expression that suggested he observed more than he immediately revealed. "Miss Sullivan, I'm Elijah Montgomery, editor of the Oakridge Gazette." His handshake was firm, his manner direct without being pushy. "I've been hoping to speak with you about Eagle Crest Ranch and your experiences during the recent storm." Emma glanced at Takoda, who had paused in his work, his expression neutral but watchful. "Mr. Montgomery, I've just heard about your newspaper. It seems Oakridge is growing in unexpected ways." "Progress comes even to the most remote places. Eventually, Miss Sullivan." Montgomery smiled, revealing a subtle dimple in his left cheek. "I believe a community benefits from having a voice, and from hearing voices that might otherwise go unnoticed." There was something in his tone that caught Emma's attention. "An admirable philosophy, Mr. Montgomery, though I imagine not everyone appreciates having all voices heard equally." "Indeed." His eyes flickered briefly to Takoda, then back to Emma. "Which is precisely why I find your ranch so interesting. I understand you've implemented some rather progressive practices. The conversation was interrupted by Sheriff Grant, who approached with his characteristic unhurried stride. "Miss Sullivan, good to see you in town." He nodded to Takoda with the easy respect he had shown from their first meeting. "Mr. Montgomery here been talking your ear off? Man's got more questions than a prosecuting attorney." The editor laughed good-naturedly. "Occupational hazard, Sheriff. Information is my business." "Well, don't let him keep you all day, Miss Sullivan. Storm left plenty for all of us to manage." Grant tipped his hat and continued on his rounds, leaving Emma with the distinct impression he'd interrupted deliberately to give her an easy exit if desired. Instead, she found herself intrigued by the newspaperman. "Perhaps you'd like to visit Eagle Crest properly, Mr. Montgomery. See our operations firsthand, rather than relying on town gossip." Montgomery's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "I'd appreciate that greatly, Miss Sullivan. Would tomorrow be convenient?" The invitation, offered on impulse, led to one of the most thought-provoking days Emma had experienced since taking over Eagle Crest. Montgomery arrived promptly the following morning, dressed practically for a ranch visit, but still carrying the air of an educated Easterner. His questions were insightful, focused not just on the ranch's operations, but on the philosophy behind Emma's approach to management. He showed particular interest in Takoda's horse training methods, taking copious notes as the Comanche demonstrated his techniques with a spirited mare. What impressed Emma most was Montgomery's lack of preconceived judgment. He observed, questioned, and listened without imposing expectations, a rarity in her experience with outsiders. "Your partnership is remarkable," Montgomery commented, as they shared lunch on the ranch house porch, watching ranch hands work with cattle in the distance. Few would have imagined a successful collaboration between a woman rancher and a Comanche horse trainer in Oklahoma Territory. "Necessity often overcomes prejudice," Emma replied. After Sheriff Redfield's schemes were exposed, Eagle Crest needed to rebuild. Takoda's skills with horses created a new revenue stream when we needed it most. And yet, from what I've observed, it's more than mere business advantage. Montgomery's perceptiveness was slightly unnerving. "You've created something rather revolutionary here, a place where competence matters more than convention." The conversation shifted to Montgomery's own background. He had worked for newspapers in Chicago and St. Louis before deciding to establish his own publication. "I grew tired of reporting on society functions and political maneuverings," he explained. "The real story of America is happening in places like Oakridge. Communities forging new paths, sometimes stumbling, sometimes succeeding brilliantly." By the time Montgomery departed late that afternoon, Emma had agreed to a formal interview for the Gazette's inaugural edition. She found herself looking forward to reading his perspective on Eagle Crest and the evolving territory around them. That evening, she discussed the newspaper editor with Takoda as they reviewed plans for expanding the horse training operation. "He sees much," Takoda observed, "but does not judge quickly. Unusual for a white man from the cities." "I found him refreshingly open-minded," Emma agreed. "His newspaper could be good for Oakridge if he maintains that approach. Or dangerous," Takoda countered. "Words have power. They can build understanding or fuel fear." It was a valid concern. Emma had witnessed firsthand how quickly sentiment could turn in frontier communities, how tenuous the peace could be between different groups with competing interests and deeply held prejudices. "We'll have to wait and see which path he chooses," she said finally. The first edition of the Oakridge Gazette appeared 3 weeks later, printed on proper newspaper stock with crisp black type. Emma's interview featured prominently on the front page, alongside articles about the proposed railroad spur, recent territorial legislation, and educational opportunities for local children. Montgomery had quoted her fairly, focusing on Eagle Crest's innovations and economic contributions to the region rather than sensationalizing the unusual partnership at its heart. The article mentioned Takoda respectfully, emphasizing his expertise rather than his heritage. But it was an editorial on the back page that truly captured Emma's attention, titled "The Future of Our Territory." It spoke eloquently about the potential for a new kind of community, one that valued skill and character over background, that recognized the strength in diversity rather than fearing it. "In places like Eagle Crest Ranch," Montgomery wrote, "we glimpse what might be possible when old prejudices are set aside in favor of practical cooperation. The question facing Oakridge, indeed facing our entire nation, is whether we have the courage to follow such examples, or if we will cling to divisions that ultimately diminish us all." The editorial generated considerable discussion in town. Some dismissed it as naive idealism, others found it inspirational. What no one could deny was that Montgomery had skillfully placed a challenging idea into public discourse, without being confrontational about it. As spring gave way to summer, Oakridge continued its transformation. The railroad survey team arrived, confirming that a spur line would indeed be constructed the following year. New families settled in the area, drawn by reports of fertile land and a progressive community. The Gazette flourished, becoming a respected voice not just locally, but in the wider territory. Emma and Takoda expanded their operations, with Eagle Crest now known for both its quality cattle and exceptional horses. Their partnership, once viewed as a temporary arrangement born of unusual circumstances, had become an established and respected collaboration. They rarely spoke of what lay beneath that partnership, the current of understanding that had grown between them, deeper than friendship but undefined by either. It existed in shared glances across the corral, in the way they could communicate with minimal words, in the mutual respect that had evolved into something both of them sensed but neither quite named. The autumn cattle drive proved to be Eagle Crest's most successful ever, with prices higher than predicted due to increased demand from eastern markets now more easily accessed through the promised railroad. The evening after the buyers departed, Emma found Takoda at his favorite spot, overlooking the valley, watching the sunset paint the landscape in gold and crimson. "We've done well," she said, settling beside him on the rocky outcropping. "Better than I hoped when we started." Takoda nodded, his profile strong against the deepening sky. "The land is generous when treated with respect. The horses thrive. The cattle grow fat. These are good signs." "And the people?" Emma asked, the question holding more weight than its simplicity suggested. He turned to look at her then, his dark eyes reflecting the sunset's glow. "Some learn, some resist. Change comes slowly, like water shaping stone." "Montgomery's editorials help," Emma observed. "He makes people think without making them defensive." "Words alone cannot change." "Arts," Takoda replied, "but seeing truth with one's own eyes, that has power." He gestured toward Oakridge in the distance. "They see Eagle Crest succeeding. They see a woman and a Comanche working as equals. Some begin to question what they were taught. Is it enough?" The question had haunted Emma increasingly as she witnessed both progress and persistent prejudice in the territory. Will it ever be enough? Takoda was silent for a long moment, considering. "My grandfather was a great warrior who fought against the coming of your people. My father lived to see our hunting grounds shrink, our freedom constrained. I have sought a different path, neither surrender nor war, but finding new ways to honor old wisdom." He looked at her directly, his gaze unwavering. "What we build here matters, not just for us, but for those who will come after. It says, this is possible." The simplicity and truth of his words touched Emma deeply. Eagle Crest had become more than a successful ranch. It was a statement about possibility, about the future that might exist if enough people chose it. As the last light faded from the sky, she made a decision that had been forming in her mind for months. The North Valley. I want to deed it to you officially, not as Eagle Crest land that you use, but as your own property. A place where you might build something that's truly yours. Takoda's expression registered surprise, quickly controlled. Why would you do this? Because it's right, Emma said simply. Because you've earned it. Because I want you to stay, not as my employee or even my partner, but as my equal in every way that matters. The words hung between them, their meaning expanding beyond the practical matter of land ownership. Takoda studied her face in the gathering darkness, as if searching for something essential. I have watched you build your father's legacy into something new, he said finally. Something he would be proud to see. You lead with wisdom and courage. He paused, then added quietly, I would stay land or no land. It wasn't quite a declaration. Neither of them was ready for that. But it was an acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them, transcending the boundaries others might. See? Then we'll build something new together, Emma said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. Something that honors where we've come from, but isn't limited by it. As they made their way back toward the ranch house, the first stars appearing overhead, Emma felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would always be those who rejected the vision they represented, but it was worth pursuing. Eagle Crest had begun as her father's dream, survived Redfield's schemes, and now stood as a testament to what could be achieved when courage overcame convention. Whatever the future held, that legacy would endure. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.